we started to equate consuming content with learning a bit too easily. And while this is a way of learning, the fact that I have gigabytes of content available to me that I can consume even on my mobile at my own pace during my commute and all that, it doesn't necessarily help me develop my skills. One of my colleagues was saying that you don't learn how to ski just by reading a book about ski. You actually need to do some practice, you have some feedback. And I like to think that humans to human learning is pretty awesome. Of course, it takes time. It's maybe less measurable than completing a course, but I think there is something fundamental in our brains, in our minds, in our societies for that matter, that make learning from each other so natural and so effective.
Benoit, it's really great to have you on the episode today. I really appreciated your thoughtful perspective you share on social media, and also our conversations so far have been really awesome. So I'm glad to dig into learning with you today.
Well, thanks for having me. I look forward, from what I've known from you so far, I think we have a lot of interest in common. So let's share.
Great. I think a great place to start is the conversation we had last time we chatted, which was more around how do we think about learning from the learner experience, right? And one of the things that I remember that you said was you really want to help organizations move away from pushing content to actually enabling people. Can you say a little bit more what you mean by that and why that's such an important thing to solve for?
Absolutely. And it's a big soapbox for me, so I'll try to keep it short and concise. I think for many reasons, including remote work, the rise of LMS, the digitization of work, we started to equate a bit too easily consuming content with learning. And while this is a way of learning, the fact that I have gigabytes of content available to me that I can consume even on my mobile at my own pace during my commute and all that, it doesn't necessarily help me develop my skills, because it's one thing to read, to learn, to consume. One of my colleagues was saying that you don't learn how to ski just by reading a book about ski. You actually need to do some practice. You need to have some feedback. And I like to think that humans to human learning is pretty awesome. Of course, it takes time. It's maybe less measurable than completing a course. But I think there is something fundamental in our brains, in our minds, in our societies for that matter, that make learning from each other so natural and so effective, right? So there's a part of the answer is how we are made. The other part is that if you look at how organizations that are really good at growing skill, what is it that they do? Well, they create these moments, these processes where you coach someone, you give feedback, you trust someone to do a task or an activity, and then one day you earn the right to do the activity by yourself because somebody was next to you and you could shadow, you can learn from watching that person, and then that person is telling you how to do it. And it's through that ongoing reinforcement rather than clicking next and then having a quiz at the end, which again has a place, right? I'm just saying we need to remember what learning is. Maybe in learning and development, we should remember the development part, not just the learning part.
I fully agree with that. Learning is like what happens inside somebody's brain, right? Like you have to create new neural connections, and that necessarily requires the right kind of effort and activity that actually mirrors the way you're going to actually do that thing on your job or something like that. And reading is a very or just consuming is a very passive experience for most people. It doesn't actually reflect how you're going to end up doing the thing. So you don't actually create the right neural connections. It's maybe just awareness or exposure. With that in mind, what are the different ways in which you typically try to help people think beyond the content and create the right environments, but also do it in a sustainable way?
I mean, there are many ways, and I'm sure you've seen some of them at plays, maybe in your own organization. This is also what you're applying. If it's not learning online, and if it's not just learning in the classroom, what are the other means, right? And you have a variety of mechanism by which people can learn, right? And I already mentioned a couple of there's job shadowing, right? Just being close to someone and seeing how they do the work. Mentoring, coaching, all of these different type of relationship between someone, and you create that sort of osmosis and relationship by which people learn. I think there's still a place also for formal learning, right? I'm not saying that it should all be informal, but even in formal learning, it should be structured in a way that is congruent with how our brain work, right? Like you were mentioning the neural connection. I mean, I think we all read the principle that neurons that fire together wire together, right? That's the art of. So if we don't get to fire together, they're not going to work. And like you see, if I just watch something, I might connect the dots, or one day I'm going to remember the information, but I don't get the practice plus feedback, right? So again, if you think about a role like sales, if you want to learn how to be good at developing relationship with client and solutioning, you have to do it, and you have to get feedback from the clients, feedback from your colleagues. So when we work with organization, we look at the skills they're trying to develop and how can you create an environment where they can try, hopefully get it wrong, because what a fantastic error signal when you get something wrong, because now you know what you're missing and then you can correct your behavior. So I'm trying to remind people that this is how people have been learning forever until the last 20 and 30 years. And then it's building those experience based on the skill gaps that organization might have. But I'm sure, as a leader, you're probably coaching a lot of people that works close to you. You might have some that you consider almost like your apprentice, right? That you stay really close and you empower progressively.
We'll get to the apprentice part soon, because I think it's one of the things that you mentioned last time too that I really want to dive further into. I agree with your observation that for many parts of the L&D industry, L&D has been equated to just content factory. And moving organizations from seeing itself as the content factory into something like a more strategic enabler of capability, a big shift, right? So how do you help organizations make that transition? Especially, I mean, today I think they don't have a choice. Like content factory is really automated nowadays.
Yes. And it's getting cheaper, right?
Right.
So we're not saying no more content. We're just saying, okay, now that I can generate my own training curriculum with the next AI, then how do we re-engineer work so that learning happened during the work, right? Because I mean, I'm sure you recall about 20 years ago, we also, maybe 15, start talking about learning in the flow of work integrated learning. I still found that for most people, it means I'm working, and I'm going to stop working. I'm going to watch something for 5-10 minutes on a device that's convenient. So it's going to feel integrated and in the flow of work, but I'm still out of the flow, right? Which again, there's nothing wrong in itself. Sometimes we have to stop, pause, and go deeper. That's perfectly fine. Not every learning should be in the flow, but true learning in the flow of work means I'm working, and by doing some kind of work, I stop developing my skills, my capability. So it's building programs in which we would typically start by a specific job role, because even though job descriptions are moving and then maybe it's the end of jobs or the end of traditional hierarchy, all that good stuff, sure. But we all have a set of objectives that we're accountable for, KPIs we're trying to maximize. So whatever you define as a job, that thing is changing because of, pick your favorite, like AI, technology, regulation, customer expectation, employee expectation. So if you can figure out how a job will change and figure out what are the things you should be doing different, then over time you will close that skilled gap, right? Because if you know that my job is to be increasingly a collaborative database storyteller, like so many internal roles, then if this is the future of my job, then I need to find ways to integrate little change in my routine. And sure, maybe sometime I'll consume a little bit of content, right? Because that's going to help me reinforce some thinking. But what are the different activities I can engage? What are the practice run? How can I stretch my work to learn by doing things I'm less comfortable with? I loved when the talent marketplace start to happen in the HR technology market, because we're now offering people a chance to take on a gig or a project. So they do something that's useful for them. It's useful for the organizations, and they're learning at the same time. Like, how fantastic is that? You're learned by doing, right? That's the true learning in the flow of work.
It reminds me of how, you're at a consulting firm. My background is in consulting. The whole consulting
Oh, they are
industry,
everywhere.
other marketplaces, right? And in fact, part of the reason why you learn so fast is that you constantly move to new project, and you're like constantly having to stretch yourself in a new context, working with new people, with new clients, like new difficulties, and you don't get a chance to sort of get complacent. So I understand what you mean by learning in the flow of work, really meaning more restructuring work such that it incentivizes learning and not people just doing the same thing like over and over again.
Oh, absolutely. And I think beside professional service firm, organization that find a way to create that, whether through processes or culture, they offer developmental opportunities to their people. And to me, this is key, right? That's the development part.
I have a question for you. I'm actually curious what you think. I won't tell you upfront my current opinion on it, but like
Yeah.
not just an opinion. I don't have an answer. There's a lot of people who interpret learning in the flow of work as a version of performance support. Like while you're doing the job, the tool itself is, guiding you and so on. What do you think about that direction of learning in the flow of work where while you're doing the thing, the tool helps you learn? Like, do you think that's possible? In what ways do you think it's very effective, ineffective? I'm just curious, like what you think.
Yeah, I'll be a bit philosophical here because that's my background. The more we can have these tools, the better. I think there's a lot of things that I would love to get out of my plate and have a tool doing that. Now, if I can execute the task without having me to master the how, right? Because I'm outsourcing the how to another system, then technically I'm not learning. You could be saying that the joint system of me plus my environment jointly is learning, but we all know that no, my own brain has not learned something, or maybe I learned how to trigger another system. I think there's a value in the idea, though, that learning, when it happens, should find me where I need it. Right? I should not have to go through 5 different screens or always look for something. There's a philosopher that was calling it the irritation of doubt, right? When we doubt something, when we don't know, we find that annoying and we need to close that. If we can make it simple for people, that's fantastic. Have they necessarily learned something? No, I think they have easy access to information. But I think the more we have these tools, the more we can be performing. But we also have to be mindful that if we don't have desirable difficulty, productive struggles, there's different version of that idea out there. But if we don't have that muscle effort, then we can't build muscle, mentally speaking.
Interesting.
What's your take on it?
I tend to agree with you. I'm skeptical of the idea. Well, skeptical of the idea of performance support being a good tool, or at least in the way I've seen them implemented. And maybe the way I
A
actually
good tool or a good tool to learn?
good tool to learn.
Okay.
So
Different, right?
Yeah, good tool to get the job done.
Yes.
And the way that I actually usually differentiate is 99% of the tools that I've run into are built for speed. Like it helps you get the thing done faster. I don't think speed like focused tools are very good at learning because people outsource their thinking, as you said. I've seen like very few, but I have seen performance tools that are much more on driving quality of your output rather than speed. So what it does is it grades you and makes you iterate until you get it to a higher grade or something like that. And tells you what the thing you did was like a lower grade. Something like that, I actually think does force you to step back because it forces you to like reflect like, why is the thing that I just did not good? And you have to like figure out how to like make it better. But I think inevitably most performance support tools end up going down the speed route because it's what the market wants. And I don't think there's a great tool. And also when you're doing something, people are busy. They just want to get the stuff done. They don't want the tool to be a friction, like telling you, step back, like reflect. They're like, screw this prompt. I'm just trying to get work done, right? So I think we're just in a different mode. As a result, I'm like more skeptical of that implementation usually, or the idea. It sounds really nice, but I think it's just not how our brain works and how we're incentivized in the moment. So unless you figure out the right UX, it like doesn't really work.
No, it's interesting. If you don't acquire new information or skills, then you haven't learned something. But there are cases that's okay. Like I don't want to learn everything. I don't want to learn every step in a CRM. I just want to get my report, my update done. So I'm happy if I can click somewhere. But then if you think about other type of performance support, right? You can imagine if you are somebody in a call center talking to a client, handling a difficult situation. If I have an agent that's feeding me like ways to improve how I talk to the client, how to be more and more sensitive and all that, it can improve my performance. Maybe I'm going to be choosing the right words with the client. Does that make me learn though? I think there are certain cases where that ongoing feedback can help you learn. Because if you have the same feedback over time, you're thinking, maybe I should take the time to be a bit more empathetic, right? There's a difference between, say, a walk me, right? Something that's very tool-based and maybe something that brings you into a more complex interaction, like interaction with someone else.
Yeah, for sure. I want to move into the apprenticeship, which which you
Yes,
mentioned earlier. This is another thing that you said last time that I really wanted to dive into. I think what you told me last time was, hey, we're losing the apprenticeship model in many ways, but we need to bring it back. So I would love for you to define, like, what do you mean by apprenticeship model in your case, and why does it matter today?
absolutely. And I must give all credit to our chief learning officer here at Deloitte, Neil Hunter, because in Canada it's really the one who brought it back to the front of the learner experience and made us sensitive to it. And now it's becoming a big thing that I want to now take to our clients as well. So apprenticeship is essentially when you learn with someone through your work. You have this sense of osmosis. It's not like coaching, because coach, you have like a very specific interaction, and that person that is coaching you is not necessarily working with you. If you are an apprentice, you are working side to side with someone. There's typically somebody who has more experience on a topic and the other one has less. By questioning, by engaging, coaching in the sense of coaching in the moment, correcting by giving feedback, we have a list of 8 different activities that, as a guide, as we call it, as a guide, you guide your apprentice into learning. And I think the best example for anyone who watch any medical show is when you get to a teaching hospital, right? First, you watch how to do an intubation. Then one day you do one, but under very close supervision. Then one day you get to do it alone. And then one day you do it alone and nobody's watching because you're fully entrusted, right? So there's this idea that over time, we're giving you more and more freedom and flexibility. And we lost that because of a couple of things. Having, fat organization, a distributed work model, right? Not just the post-COVID remote work, but even before that, right? You work with people who are in different offices around the world. You don't have, and especially in our industry in professional services, we used to have a group of people. Come with me, I'll bring you to the client meeting. You can see how we do that. Come with me, I'll help put together the proposal. You can see how we do that. And then over time, you gain that close exposure. And people were telling us in the survey that they don't get this apprenticeship type of experience enough. So we said, okay, we need to do something. So internally, and we're going to publish something about that in the next few months. So I'll make sure to send you the link. But we formalize what it means to be an apprenticeship. And now we're rolling this out. We have a pilot cohort. The feedback was amazing. Like over 90% of the participants told us that it's changing their job. It's helping them to be either a better employee or a better leader. So clearly we hit something that was missing. And then if you throw AI on top of that, the first target of AI are all the entry-level job, or at least entry-level tasks. So if we have a world of AI and laptop, we don't get a chance to work with each other. We're going to have to formalize the informal, because it used to be something very natural, work in a kitchen, look at the chef, and then one day you get to do the sauce. But it's going to take you a year before you can do that. The kitchen is everywhere and nowhere.
I love that. And I fully agree with you that, like, I think what is powerful for me about the apprenticeship model is the idea that you're watching and like seeing someone do it and you're doing it yourself. So it's very close to the learning, the modality and the thing you do is very close to the thing you actually have to do.
And it's based on the idea of being competent, right?
Right.
Like you're watching someone who is competent, and then they're watching you until you are competent.
Right. There's a tacit model, tacit knowledge that's getting transferred in ways that like you have to do. And you said early feedback was really positive. What about that thing did people say was the most impactful? Was there any themes around aspects that really stood out? Like, oh, it was this moment, or it was this thing that we did. I'm curious if you've seen any like nuggets of insight.
Yeah. Well, there was a moment in a way because we did like a little sort of experiential training where people had to be in the role of somebody who was giving direction or somebody who was receiving direction. And it was a big aha moment for a lot of the folks where they were in the role of receiving instruction without having access to the full details. So it was a good analogy to work sometime where we work with data, information, knowledge. It's a bit abstract. So what do we mean? What are we trying to accomplish, right? And it shows the sense of stress it's creates when you're trying to achieve something. You think you're on the right path, but you're not, but the communication is sort of broken.
It's really hard to empathize with the recipient of you sort of making an ask or something unless you have been on the receiving end of a very unclear instruction or something like that. I think maybe I want to also move on to the topic that you had mentioned, which is around like product management thinking for learning. That was another sort of thing that you had mentioned that I thought was really interesting. And maybe I want to first ask you, in your mind, what does it mean to manage learning like a product instead of the typical way people think about learning?
I don't want to over intellectualize it, but when I think about a product, right, it's something that's maintained. You're looking at what's working, what's not working, what are the different feature, what is it that's needed. And then if you have multiple product, you have a portfolio of product. Certain will be demoted, other will be promoted. And there's a bit of the sales and the marketing of your product. There's the maintenance of your product, the R&D behind your product. So when we think in our case, we call that the Deloitte Academies, but they are essentially different product. That being said, right, every client is different and every client have different needs. So even though sometimes we're trying to get to have something off the shelf, it's never off the shelf, right? There's always a lot of customization. There's a lot of variability, and that's okay. That's why we do this job. I like it, but it's designing the right product and then tailoring it to the client so that we choose which feature work best, and then we take that portfolio view where we review every 6 months what's working, what's not working, and then which one should we put on our pipeline. So we had like HRBP, talent acquisition academies for our HR clients. Now we're thinking of adding in L&D one. We have AI academies. We're cranking more and more because there's a big demand for that. And then leadership. It's making sure that we're constantly shipping something new, relevant, because it's changing, right? Just like the OpenAI and Claude that have new feature every 2 weeks. We're not that intense, but we want to keep the same logic. What makes a good product, a good experience? And can we have someone like a product manager for each of those academies that has a 360 view of the design, sales, and delivery of the product?
Yeah, and I could imagine when you think about a product, it really forces identifying like what's the thing that the clients or the customers want the most, and across different your clients too, so you can build the thing that can benefit the most number of clients at the same time. What would you say are the things about the product that you hear the most or that delight your clients the most about learning, that has revealed something about how enterprise learning happens? I'm curious if you've gotten any interesting insights there.
When I think about the product, I think about the sum of the experience, right? Because again, it's a product in an abstract sense, right? At the Deloitte Academies, like other type of academies, yes, there's an in-person component. Maybe there's a part remote, but maybe there's a part online. Then there's a small pod connect for small groups. Then we have large group, and then maybe there's a mission or an activity they have to complete one-on-one with your manager. So we try to build like that learning ecosystem around every learner so that they have this variety of experience. And what people enjoy the most is that instead of cramming everything into 2 days, we spread it over 6 to 8 weeks so that they have a real experience. And you can see how over time people connect the dots. Like we don't have to connect it for them. If they learn about AI and then they get to practice, and then the next time they need to come with their own challenge with AI, and then they talk with their peers, and then they design something as a team, rather than us telling them it's important to be collaborating cross silos, we make them collaborate cross silos, and then the magic happens. It's like drip marketing, right? It's just a little bit. You change people's behaviors and mindset little by little, and then it happens. And I think they enjoy the interactive aspect, right? Because even if it's in person, like we get them to do something, right? To be active, to talk, not just sit and listen to somebody presenting slides. Like no, nobody can survive that 2026.
Right, for sure. And it allows them to like own the thing, right? Instead of just feel like fed the thing, because they
Yes.
digest it and turn it into their own ideas and go try it and come back and actually say, hey, it didn't work, and like struggle through it with each other. I mean, I know that one of the things that you mentioned last time was Deloitte Academies is very much around build, operate, transfer type model, where you're creating the thing and you ultimately want the client to be able to own and like lead the capability. How do you create something? What are the principles you have to help create something that organizations can ultimately like own and run?
It's thinking about it as a product, and then it has its own operating model, right? The first time you build an academy for a client, and again, there's a spectrum of use case, right? Sometimes it's a one-off, and that's okay. Sometimes it's a one-off, 2, 3, and sometimes it's we build, we deliver the first one, and we do train the trainer, and then they have the ownership of that. And for us, it's important to make everything explicit as possible. What are the standards of facilitation? Of course, what's the content? What's the method? Who do we want to have as a facilitator? All the assets about the timing, the delivery, the different piece of content, and all the instruction to maintain and refresh it, and clear governance. Because just like any human endeavor, if the governance is not clear, it's going to fail.
Yeah. For sure. One of the things I think about learning, I would say, is also beyond the event or the campaign or the specific period in which it gets delivered. Like people need to sustain that learning, right? They have to reinforce it, actually apply it. How do you think about that in your product and then ensuring that your clients, even if they don't work with the academies, like don't just
Yeah.
let it sort of evaporate?
Sometimes I make the joke that I'm happy to work myself out of a job in the sense that we build it so that we can get out of that. But that's okay because as much as we enjoy learning, we're also consultant. Consultant need to build new things. We need to keep evolving. If we keep delivering the same thing over and over, at some point, like we're going to lose the fire that ignited us when created that. So for us, sustainment can take different forms. Sometimes it's us as part of the engagement. We will keep doing a bit of a refresher engagement. I like to organize like AMA session, right? Ask me anything session with an expert. No script, just pure Q&A, no prep. So you get just that live interaction. So it's finding these little moments and little experience that you can either organize like this call or give them a playbook of the different things that they can take home. In the case of AI Academy, we're going to give them some ideas for a scheduled prompt, right? So that you prompt yourself and then you have a notification about something that you've been asking the tool so that it maintains your curiosity about how AI can be applied to your work, right? So that's the best case because it kind of run on its own. Other could be little internal campaign, like to create either communities of practice or just groups, some form of social connection by which people in a cohort, because we always try to organize it by cohort so that 25-ish people can have a sense of identity and then they can find each other. And again, this is very social and human. If you spend just a few hours over 6 weeks with someone, if like that person, you can ask, right? You can ping that person. It feels like a very familiar name. So consciously or not, this is another type of sustainment, right? And it's natural. It's not demanding. It's not another classroom, right? Those little nudge in the environment that make people want to keep exploring what we provided them.
I wanted to ask a question that zooms out of sort of the individual learning experiences or cohort, like how organizations' operating models are changing with AI
Yes.
and what that means for what the learning function has to do. For a long time, as in like for the last few years, there's been a lot of talks around like skills-based organizations, and there's a whole bunch of like work that's been done around like skills-based transformation. I think the AI transformation work is accelerating, but also like changing the dynamic of that conversation a little bit in the sense that a lot of people are saying it's not just skills, it's tasks also because agents work on tasks. Things are getting like automated through AI, but then people need to do more higher level work. So it feels like overall L&D as a function has to come in and deliver something fundamentally harder than before in some
Yes.
ways
Yes.
because there's a lot of change happening and the definition of work is changing. I'm curious what your view is today on how the learning function has to change and what are some of the conversations you're having with the clients who might be on the forefront of this, where they're actively thinking about the L&D operating model having to change.
Yes, absolutely. It's changing a lot of things on multiple dimensions. The easiest one, the low hanging fruit, is that yes, content creation now the cost is pretty much zero. Of course, with compliance and security, it's a different ballgame, but you could see in the near future, once everybody has access to the right tooling, because a lot of clients still have restriction. Once you have access to that, the content question, 80% of that is gone. So it means that the job now of the instructional designer is to be what I call a capability engineer, right? It's figuring out, here's a role, here's the task, the KPI, how can we help that person acquire the information, the knowledge, skills that they need to accomplish the job? What also it provides, and I think sometimes it's a bit missing from the discourse, is that AI also give fantastic tools to L&D leaders to analyze data, to find pattern. I take the example of call centers. If you can look at all the transcript of all the calls, if you can look at all the customer experience metrics, if you can look at all the system logs, all that, suddenly you can just mash it and without being an expert, at least extract some pattern and find either proof or disconfirmation of why we think the customer experience is going good or bad, and then finding, well, is there a link with learning? And then once you start to identify your learning opportunities beside the content, it's also thinking about what's the MVP learning experience here? How can I create something that has the minimal effective dose of learning? It doesn't disrupt the person in the call center, but gives that person the right developmental experience. So now you can be very precise specialize in building like skill-based learning, because now you can just pull the skill profile even of a person for that matter. So you can tailor, you can personalize, you can engineer how somebody's going to grow in an organization because you have access to all that data. The challenge from an operating model perspective is that you, as an L&D leader, can do that. So can anyone else in the organization. And if anyone else can do that, then back again to the question of federation or the right governance. I think it still calls for a federated model. You still want to have consistency in the use of AI, in the creation of content, the standards, the templates, the contracts, the technology, the platform. So it should make L&D an even more stronger orchestrator of learning and less of a doer of learning. Because otherwise, it's convenient to stick with like leadership and diversity and safety and compliance, but really your role nowadays to help the organization perform and figure out what are the developmental experience we need to bake into the work so that we can achieve our business goal. And that's a tough question. You need the whole organization to come together as a learning ecosystem, but you're not going to do all the learning. You're going to have, though, to create the relationship with the different other L&D shops that are popping up everywhere. Not trying to squash them, just trying to find a way to harmonize the ways of work, right? And this is increasingly what we see, because you cannot centralize all of that. Like at some point, you need people in the business who understand the business. You can't get away from that.
Yeah, that was the final question I wanted to ask based on what you were saying, which is, I'm curious if you agree with this. It sounded to me that the work that L&D is doing more and more has to be much more work aligned and business aligned, because specifically helping people on specific roles, the capability engineer, which I love the sort of the role term, you can't do it as a centralized function that doesn't understand what the nuances of work that's happening. A lot of the centralized L&D's function in the past have been more generalized sort of delivery of training, if you will. But if both the content creation and delivery is getting like largely automated, then the harder thing is being in the business and actually like figuring this stuff out. I'm curious if you are having conversation with like the org of L&D at all, or how that's happening today.
It's something that everybody feels it's changing, but I would say beyond L&D, it's in every role where until recently you could learn the craft without learning the industry, right? I think increasingly, because all of our clients are asking that, you cannot be a finance business partner and don't understand the business. You cannot be a recruiter, don't understand your internal client, right? That it's completely new, but I think the pressure to really understand the business you're in, if you're in HR, you're still in the business of manufacturing, retail, FSI, whatever your industry is, right? So understanding the context, because if you stay in your rational, decontextualized understanding, sure, you can be an expert in learning and change management in all of those disciplines. But if you don't enrich that with the context, then you lose relevance for the business user. The good thing also with AI is that, well, you can get that context pretty soon, pretty quick, right? If you're smart and you take the time to ask the right question and be curious and engage, like you can upskill or teach yourself at least the first principles or the key consideration of your different internal client and the reality of the business that you're in. So I see the question happening, but a lot in the logic of how do we support people in the rest of the organization? Because everyone who is in a support function right now, their manager are all telling us, I need my people to be more, bigger favorite, strategic, service-oriented, customer-centric, proactive, all of these good things that we expect of knowledge worker nowadays. And a lot of that goes through context. And for years, we build perfectly blind, deaf processes. You follow the step 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's perfect. It should give you the right output. It works if the world doesn't change, right? If the world is simple, then you can just go through the flow. Now that this is a machine task and the world is even more complex, we cannot have decontextualized thinker. So all of these leaders come to us and ask us, how would we do that, right? And this is why we build different type of learning academies for finance and IT and all that, because it's more or less the same questions all the time.
Benoit, thanks for joining and sharing these rich thinking on what you're doing with Deloitte Academies, what you're seeing in terms of apprenticeship and the product management thinking. This was awesome, and hopefully a start of more conversation I can have with you to sort of learn about your thinking, evolving thinking around the field of learning. So thank you.
All right, great pleasure. You had some fantastic questions, so hope your audience will appreciate it.